Welcome to the podcast, Broc. I just want to give people a little bit of a background as how we came to here today. And I think it was almost a couple of years ago, I was invited to a health retreat over in Australia, in the Northern Territory. And it was my friend Helen who invited me to take part to be a practitioner to work on the participants of this retreat. And it freaked me out, to be honest, because it was working with the Indigenous community, the Yolngu people. And I grew up in Australia and I had no idea about really the history of Australia. I was really ignorant and I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I said yes because I'm always up for a challenge. And it was one of the most incredible experiences that I have been exposed to. It was really slowing down and observing how maybe life should be. But anyway, if we fast forward through that, I got to cross paths with you, and you were a health coach and you were embedded in this community. You were living on a really remote area of Australia with the Yolngu people. And we were encouraged as the coaches and therapists on this retreat to treat one another. And I think you approached me and we did a session together. And I could see what was going on in your body and I talked about it, but I could see that you were absorbing it, but you hadn't really spoken about it. And then we fast forward maybe almost a year later, and you jumped on board my emotional body practitioner training, and I got to hear the whole story. And I feel like I was in such a privileged position, as well as the participants that were on the course who are other coaches and therapists and practitioners, because you had never spoken about this out loud from what I understood. And it just goes to prove again that we should never judge people on their story, because we're all human and we all go through these experiences. And I am just so grateful that you were jumping on board. And I think this is potentially one of the first times that you've really spoken out publicly about your history, including your childhood and where you were versus where you are now.
Yeah, it's a really good introduction. Thanks, Jin, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I'll be lying if I said I was completely excited, not a little bit nervous. The whole point of me jumping on this podcast actually stemmed from a discussion I had with you when I was doing some work during the emotional anatomy course, and I was invited onto a health coaching podcast about 2 years ago, and I rejected the offer to be on the podcast because of my fear of public speaking and the fear of the inadequacy I felt and all that stuff that I'll dive into later on the podcast around, them stored emotions and where I was at in my life at that time. So yeah, it's good to be here.
Yes, you have an incredible story, and I think you should circle back to that health podcast and ask them to for a second chance. But I'm sure people will be reaching out to you after this. So can you give us a little bit of insight into who you are?
Yeah, so Broc Martin, 33-year-old male Aboriginal man from the Punthamarra Mithaka people. That's in southwest Queensland. Currently, I'm living on Elcho Island, so still in the Aboriginal community that I was working with when I met you on the Together retreat in Darwin. My role has shifted on the island a little bit since when I first met you, and I credit that shift to you and the work I did in the emotional anatomy course. So I'm supporting a local Aboriginal man now with his fishing industry, and also just moving into the space of what is my soul's work, what lights me up, what gives me passion. So I'm spending a bit of time in reflection while also getting paid to do something I love at the moment, which is fishing and providing nutrient-dense food to the community.
Great, so good. Now, I already have a million questions stemming from that and our interactions with one another. Where should I start? Is probably, I know that when I saw you that first time in Darwin and I was giving you my interpretation of what was going on in your body, and I was sitting there going, oh God, am I wrong? Is this sinking in? And you did confirm some of these things later. So I guess you went through what most people would consider a pretty full-on childhood. Can you give us a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah, of course. So I've the first time I'll go back to the point where I had that session with the Aaa Together retreat, and just the ability that you had to hold space and create that emotional safety for me to first discuss some of that. But I've just thought the best way to do this, to share a little bit about my childhood, was it fits in nicely with that developmental age of 0 to 5. So my mum had me when she was pretty young. She was 16, maybe 17. I'm not quite sure. So I was born to a young mother. She had her own battles with addiction at the time. My father and her separated. I think I was very young, for a couple of weeks. So I was with mum, and she travelled around a lot. She travelled lots. Like, only recently I had a chance to have a good chat with her and talk about some of that stuff and just get a clearer picture, because I've got memories, but I've also got memories that I've suppressed around what happened from that age of 0 to 5. So I've discovered that between the age of 0 to 5, we'd moved up to 30 times at least, all over southeast Queensland. And I know from the work I've done now as an adult, looking back at that constant moving and sense of security that I never had, actually I've carried that unconsciously in my adult life. So by the age of 5, mum couldn't look after me anymore. So I went and stayed with my father, and my father was married to a lady, and she was an alcoholic and had mental health issues, schizophrenia. So while I was there about 6 to 12 months in total, I suffered ongoing physical abuse and some sexual abuse. And so this is when I'm 7 years old. And that was a significant period of my life. It was quite traumatic. So after one particular night, I was hospitalised through the abuse, and that's when the child services came in, and they just identified that the situation I was living in was not good, and I was removed from my family. So that meant that I went to foster care. So I went into foster care at the age of 7, and due to that, in the first 7 years of my life, I was very hypervigilant, distrusting of people. The people that were meant to provide care and provide that safe, loving environment had failed to do so for me. So I just had I became very independent very early, and like I didn't trust. And I moved also. So once I went into the foster care system, I went into different homes a lot. So I was again moving different homes, never quite settling. I had a good period of when I was like 9 or 10 where I stayed at a place that I really enjoyed. It was a small school, 30 kids in total. I was involved in sport. Like I was really thriving there. But that placement broke down, and then I ended up going back to my mother's adopted mother. So I got to spend time with my biological brother as well. It was really nice for that year, but that household was also, I suffered more of physical abuse there. So I ended up living with some friends of mum's. My mother was in prison at the time. So at the age of 11, I started having this introduction to my biological family, which I hadn't had any connection with for up to 4 years. So as an 11-year-old, I slipped into drinking. I started drinking alcohol, smoking marijuana, and yeah, that all happened from about 11 to 12 onwards.
How did you get introduced to the alcohol and drugs so early?
The people that I was living with, who were my mum's friends, they were just like, that was their lifestyle. So they were basically allowed me to do what I wanted at that age. And now, upon reflecting back on it, that was just my coping mechanism for the life that I'd had. And I thought I'd found the relief that it gave me through, the instant gratification and separation out of myself. So, and I took to it like a duck to water, like thought I'd found this is my medicine. So yeah, and it progressed quickly. So by the age of 15, I was in juvenile detention homes through committing crimes, a lot of just property offences, breaking into businesses, anything to get money, stealing cars. So by the age of 15, I was living this lifestyle of in and out of detention, crime, drugs. Yeah, so that was my teenage years as well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that. We'll go into those a bit more if you're happy to. So, what led you down this path of looking into the past a little bit more? Where were you at?
Yep. So my teenage years, so it didn't stop. When I was 18, I got sent to prison for 3 years. These are all deep. I've reflected deeply on these experiences because they've molded my worldview. Being an 18-year-old male in a male prison, it's a place where there's lots of masculine energy, negative role modeling. It's so from the age of 18 to 21, where I'm still developing and growing as an independent person, I had these role models, and spending 3 years in prison, and then I got out from prison and nothing had changed. If anything, I'd become worse. I'd learned to do things to survive, basically, that didn't serve me well living in society. So I was only out of prison for 3 weeks, and then I went back for 2 years. So essentially, when I look at it like that block, I'd had spent 3 years, 3 weeks out, and 2 years. So I spent 5 years in prison.
Mm-hmm.
I was very, very lucky at the end of that last prison sentence. I met a mentor in prison who was able to connect with me, connection again, something I felt I was missing lots of my life, was like a real connection. And he was able to guide me to the realization, if I continued to do what I was doing, I was going to keep getting what I always got, which was, at that stage, I was 23, going on to 24, and just spent the last 5 years in prison. And as a result, I was suffering. I had a brave mask on, and I had ego and bravado, but on the inside, I was suffering. I was a lost little boy in a man's body that was just doing his best in the environment I was in. And we're very adaptable people, and I loved reading when I was a little boy. Like, over the last 2 years since I've met you, I've been going back to that little boy and doing that inner child work, and it's been I can see how I got diverted away from that in the drugs and the addiction and the lifestyle, but coming back to that. So it's a significant time for me, because at 24, I came out of prison and I made the decision to seek support around the addiction. And I did that through going to a addiction treatment center. And as a result of that, I adopted spiritual principles in my life. And it's just been a journey of growth and self-discovery since that point. So that would have been going on nearly 10 years ago. So I would have been 24. And I was really, really blessed at the time. I had people around me that I could seek support and mentoring from. So it all happened around 24. So that's when I started looking back. And I only just scratched the surface. Like, I thought I was doing really good for a couple of years. But again, in the last 2 to 3 years, I've had more growth through going deeper into the emotional body connection that I learned through when I first encountered that with you. That really opened up a new level of self exploration and releasing.
Yeah. Can you take us through a little bit more of your childhood? Because you touched on it briefly, and you go into as much detail as you're comfortable with. So, going from foster families, like, how many siblings do you have? What's the family dynamics? And tell us a little bit more about your parental relationships as well.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, from the ages 7 to 11, I had no contact with my biological family, but I always had this deep yearning for my mother, particularly. I didn't have that for my father because I blamed him a lot and I was resentful for what had happened with his wife at the time that happened to me. So I had that feeling towards him. So I didn't have that longing. And again, he's an Aboriginal man as well, so I had a big family on that side. My mum had after I was born, Mum had 2 more daughters, but they were adopted out to her adopted mother as well. And then she had 2 other boys who I'm very close with today. And so today, it's funny when someone asks me about my family, it's just like, oh my God, I've got to like put all these pieces together and get it that. But to cut a long story short, I've got my 2 brothers that I'm very close with today, and Mum. Like when I came to you to do some one-on-one work, that was the big relationship that I needed to put work into. Like I had to. When I got clean and got off the drugs and that, my relationship with my mother, I sort of went into her father, like a parenting role, and it went to the point where I had to set boundaries around that, and I withdrew, and I probably withdrew too much because I had these suppressed emotions of anger, hurt, sadness, grief that I hadn't even processed. So the last couple of years I've been doing work on that as well. And it's today my relationship with Mum is, it's not how I want it to be in a perfect world, but I've been able to come to the place where I can give her love and love her unconditionally. And just because I don't receive the love that I want from her in the shape or form that I expect it, doesn't mean I need to withdraw my love. She came up, visited me on Elcho Island at the end of last year. That was really, really nice. It was a funny conversation I said to her. Because I surprised her and flew her up, and I said, when's the last time you were on a plane, Mum? And she said, in 1986, when they extradited me to Sydney to go to court. So it was a really nice thing to be able to do, to be able to fly her up. And she's still has her battles. Like, she's a battler, and she still has a lot of stuff that comes up for her, and particularly at the end of last year, it was a tough time for her. So to be able to be there and be the son for her and just show her love was a really beautiful thing. It was really nice. And I wouldn't have been able to do that 12 months ago because I would wanted to really put that boundary between myself and her problems. But as a result of the work that I did with you and the ongoing work I've been doing, it was just a really nice experience.
Well, it's great to hear that she flew up to Elcho Island and you had some time with her, because I haven't actually spoken to you for quite a few months.
Mm.
Can you talk a bit more about the environment that you grew up in with all the foster families and going to other family members? And I know that you got separated from your brother as well, who you are now quite close with.
Yep. So the environments from the age of 0 to 7 were very hostile. There was lots of alcoholism and addiction around me. About 2 or 3 years ago, I accessed something you can get from the Queensland government, which is called freedom of information. So it was a history of basically all the homes that I'd been to, the abuse that I'd suffered before that led me to being taken into care. And that was really challenging to go through that and read that and try and process that by myself at the time. I had a support network around me that I could bounce stuff off about, but I felt like really alone in going through that. And I think when I got that triggered them suppressed emotions that I pushed under about Mum. And reading some of that stuff, it was really interesting because there was just one interview in particular where I was in a police station doing a police interview talking about sexual abuse that I'd suffered, and it stated some of the facts. And I can't even remember this. Like, I must have just really suppressed it. And it said at the end of it that the abuse is suspected but can't be proven because Broc outlined very specific details that a child of that age wouldn't understand, etc., etc. And it said, and Broc is also a child that doesn't demonstrate emotions. And it just
How old were you?
6. So reading that just took me back to the defense mechanism that I used to switch on all the time. I would appear that I wasn't have emotions, and I could just go from activity to activity. And yeah, that was challenging to look at that and just realise that that's the age that I had to go back to and talk to through one of the tools that you shared. And that in itself was really nice to be able to do that during that process. When I was 11, I was living with my brother, who I love dearly, and that's when I was back with my nana. And again, it was an abusive household, and I had that. And at that time too, my mum was in prison and given birth to my other brother. So I'd gone up to prison to visit him as an infant. So I'm very close to him as well. So again, that separation from them when that placement broke down was really difficult. At the age of 11, that's when I really, that's when my drug addiction took off the most. Again, that coincides with that timing of being reunited with one of my biological siblings for a 6 to 8 month period, even though it was a hostile environment and it wasn't a pleasant experience. I had my brother and I had contact with my mum who was in prison, but at least I was going up and visiting her. And it was that real centre of origin stuff that was being met for me. So when that got broken again, that's when I really disconnected and started using substances to cope.
Did you go to school?
Yep. So I was going to grade 6. I didn't go to school. So for 6 months, I missed out on grade 6. Grade 7, I ended up going back to school, and I ended up leaving school when I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone back to study?
I did, which was a really, really awesome experience. I think one of the most important things that I could, like a message I could share with people, is the power of transformation and hope that's available. So here I am, a child that had a very disruptive childhood, drug addiction, left school at a young age, went to prison. So when I came out and I sought support, I was able to identify that, yes, I am capable. I am confident. I'm not that story. I'm not that narrative of that belief system that I have of myself. I'm not just going to be a junkie. And this was all the thoughts that I would have about myself growing up. Like, I'm destined to live this way. So when I got some good support around me and some role models, I went back to TAFE and I did my year 10, 11 and 12. I did that. And
how old were you when you went back to year 11 and 12?
25 years old. And I remember, it's a really good experience, Jin. I went into that TAFE for the first time and I had so much anxiety in my stomach just signing up, and I felt like a fish out of water. And a year ago I was in prison. So I was just like, this whole new dynamic was going on for me. And I remember that day really clearly because it was such an emotionally charged day. And I think a couple of years later, I was strolling in there, giving lectures around something, maybe child protection or something that I've gone into work. And it was just that moment when I walked in and I just delivered that speech or whatever it was. And I walked out and I thought, wow, just the amount of difference of the person that we become. We change and grow through experience. It's like even today, like just when I was driving to get prepared for this chat with you, I just had that bit of fear come up and I was like, feel that, push through. I'm going to be better from this. If I do a good podcast or not, it doesn't matter. And I'm speaking from the heart, so I didn't have to research and do that. So I did have a level of comfortability, but yeah, just being able to go back to study. And even that year at TAFE, I don't say this to blow my own horn or sound egotistical, but I did my year 10, 11 and 12. I did a Cert 3 in community services because I discovered a passion of being of service to other people. And I found that I could relate to people that had been down the same sort of beaten track that I'd come. So that passion was ignited in me. And that year I got nominated for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander of the Year award. And I was just like, who am I? Like 12 months ago, I was kicking cans in a prison yard, talking out the side of my mouth. And now a year later, I've applied myself. I've found out I can do stuff that if I put my mind to it. And it really gave me a boost of confidence. And for the first time, I felt like I was accepted into society. I'd always felt like an outcast. I'd always felt different. I'd always felt like I carried that stuff from my childhood, and I created this story about who I was and what I was destined to be. And then it's like, it's far from the truth. We have so much potential and infinite possibilities when we just get the right people and the belief in ourselves.
Oh, we absolutely do. And look, you just articulate it so amazingly. And that is you really just speaking from your heart. Now, I do want to definitely get into where you're at and more of that side of the story. But can I just drag you back a little bit into the past again? So I want to get into the drugs, the substance abuse, a little bit of the crime as well that you were involved in, and from memory, where your headspace was at and emotionally how you expressed yourself with your, say, your anger.
Yep. So the drug use started when I was 11, and it got really, it was dominating my life by the age of 15. So I was injecting speed, injecting heroin, drinking, like whatever I could get my hands on. I was involved, and like that's a regular teenager is just learning to process emotions at that age, and it's really interesting. Like my body was changing. I was I just basically was just out of control. Had no living skills. I and I found myself doing whatever it took to get what I needed, to be able to be at peace with myself. And that was a lot of work I had to do too. Like these days, looking back and processing shame and guilt around some of my actions as well. Like it's, I'm not proud of any of that stuff for that period of my life, but I also don't take away from it because it made me who I am today. So in prison, I would have witnessed violence. I would have participated in violence. I love boxing. So I was like this young man that would try and conform to an image of what it is to get through prison. I remember when I came out and of the time when I came out when I was 24, there was a really unlearning. I had to unlearn a lot of behaviours. Like if I'm angry with someone, I can't yell or try and force my will and like that there. So I had to just really work on that stuff because I'd had that stuff. Had been such a big part of my life for a long time, and I'm really, really blessed that I had good people around me that guided me and role modeled that. Like that was, I had to learn what it was like to be a man, and that concept that I had of what a man was completely wrong. It was false. It was built off these life experiences, and so I had to unlearn a lot and then learn more. I remember my drugs reached a pretty the worst that they reached, and I ended up suffering drug psychosis. And that was a really scary place to be in because I'd lost touch with reality, and I was, this particular time, I was just using lots of amphetamines and acid, and I was losing grip with reality. So I ended up into a psychosis ward as well. And that experience also changed me a lot because it showed me I felt more comfortable being in prison than in the psychosis ward because I didn't have the tools and the not knowing. And it was just such a bizarre moment for me because I was that messed up on drugs that what led me to being in the psych ward was there's a movie called Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is quite famous. And there's a scene in it where he covers himself in mud to hide from the creature. And I was that detached from reality that this was normal for me, that I'd ended up naked myself, covered in mud at McDonald's, arguing with them while they wouldn't serve me a McFlurry or whatever it was. And in my mind, I was so self-righteous why they would. I stayed there for an hour till the police arrived, and they were just like, "You've had enough. It's time for you to go to the hospital, son." So I don't forget that that's where that takes me. That's the person that I'll become if I'm not practicing and doing the work I am today to go back to that as well.
Yeah. And then you had a few incidences with authority in prison as well. And what I remember was a phone call. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so this was I'm really glad I did this bit of work with you, because there's only a number of times in my life where I've felt anger to the point of rage. And this was one particular moment when I remember it. I'd been arrested by the police. I was in the watch house and I'd asked if I could have a phone call with my mum, because that's the first thing I always do when I get arrested, is ring up mum, ask for some money or let her know where I'm a lot. And actually, one of the things mum always said to me, she was happy when I was arrested because she knew I was safe. And I've heard a few people say that in their journeys and that's what we don't realise when we're living that life, is the harm that we're causing either directly or indirectly. And so I was talking to my mum on the phone, and the police officer leant over and said, "Wrap it up. You've been on there for however long you get, a couple of minutes." And I said, "Hang on a sec." And he just leant over and hung up the phone. I pressed the dial, and I had this feeling of anger just surge through my body. I didn't express it right then. What I did was I went back to the cell, and I'd had some heroin on me and a needle as well. So I sat
How did
down.
you get that in prison?
I was just, that was so important to me to have that. I'd do whatever I had to do to get it, smuggle, contraband, anything went. So I had it on me, and I thought, I sat down, I knew I was on the camera, and I just started preparing it and just waving at the camera, knowing they'd see it, because I was so angry and I wanted them to come down. So when they came down to run into the cell with me, I've just stood up with the needle and said, "Come in, come on," and like used the needle as a weapon because I was so angry. And they used 8 cans of capsicum spray on me over a period of 10 minutes. And I was that angry that I was just hoping that officer that had hung up the phone call would come into the cell, and I wouldn't have been able to guarantee my behaviour at the time. So I was in a rage. But I really wanted to process that, because that was an emotion, that anger that took me to that place. And it's not justifiable, but I've looked at the 3 times in my life where I've been right on the edge of like not caring of the consequence of my actions, and it's all been involved with my mum. She's always been this pattern or theme in it.
Yeah, I'm often talking about, what would you tell that therapist or the doctor who told you that thing? But in this case, it's kind of like any person in a position of authority, is that you're still dealing with humans, and actually you can trigger them off pretty badly as well. So if you had a chance to speak to that officer now, that policeman, what would you say to them in that moment?
In the moment of when I was there, or in the moment today?
In the moment today, knowing that that was what happened afterwards and the rage attack that you had, what advice would you have for someone like this? Maybe there's police officers out there listening to people who are in the position that you have been in.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's I certainly know that
Because you just wanted to talk to your mum.
yeah, yep, that was the trigger. That was the trigger. So I think, especially in the authority, in the position where it's a police officer and the criminal, there's always going to be this animosity. There's a deep animosity that comes from a place that's not even real. And I was young then as well, a lot younger. I know today that having the ability to pause, respond, overreaction, like I really, really use that tool a lot. But also I've got to be careful not to do that and then not allow myself to express the anger as well, which I've learned to do. So I would, I don't know how to answer that question, Jin. I don't know what I would say, but I definitely I owe that man an apology, and probably the whole Toowoomba Police Force a huge apology for my behaviour over the years.
Well, there you go. It's out on the podcast now. That's okay if you don't know how to answer that. Okay, so you were in and out of prison, and would you classify yourself as an addict or a user?
Yeah, I would identify as an addict.
Mm-hmm.
I do identify as an addict, yeah.
Do you keep in touch with anyone from your childhood and teen years that were around you at this time?
No, but every once in a while my paths will cross with people from that life, and it's really good because our paths will cross where it's in the space where they're trying to make changes themselves. So them recognizing me and seeing who I am today is a really help. Like that in itself goes a long way to helping them to realize that, yeah, we don't have to stay in that cycle. You know, there are people that get out of that, and unfortunately I'm one of them that have been able to break that cycle and go on and find my passions for life. And yeah, I'm really blessed.
So you had this mentor who I believe you still keep in touch with. Did you go into AA programs or any addiction programs?
Yeah, I went into a 12-step fellowship. Yeah.
Did you want to share anything about that?
No, I won't share much about that, Jim, because it's in alignment with the traditions of 12-step fellowships. Is we really rely on attraction, not promotion.
Mm-hmm.
But it is
Okay.
it's an integral part of my life today, a foundation that's really helped me.
Yeah, great. And what other help did you seek out? Was there anything else?
So I hadn't gone in to do the deep inner child work. I'd avoided that. So I went through the process of adopting spiritual principles, doing some self inventory, trying to clear a bit of the wreckage of my past, and just like continue to be of service wherever possible. So that was working really well for me. It still does to this day. It wasn't until a couple of years into that I went and saw a kinesiologist that I had a good relationship with. It brought stuff up for me at the time that was really uncomfortable. So I just put a crucifix up to it, was like, stay away from me, and didn't go back to that. Which is it is what it is, but it also opened me up to realizing that there was a lot of stuff from my childhood that was impacting my day-to-day stuff today, such as avoiding intimacy, avoiding romantic relationships, expressing myself sexually that was in ways that were probably unhealthy. But
Were you quite promiscuous or closed off?
promiscuous.
Mm-hmm.
And emotionally unavailable. Very, like, just did not want to go into that space, just of vulnerability, not feeling worthy, feeling fear of abandonment and rejection, all the stuff that I can stand back now to the relationship I had with my mother. But a breaking point for me, so 2019 was a really big year for me. I was moved to Elcho Island. In 2018, I made some health changes myself.
Which were?
I tidied up my diet, lifestyle choice. I was always active. I've always been involved in football and going to the gym and whatnot. But I was eating.
How old were you in 2019? Just so I can get a bit of a timeline, because you came out of prison at 24, you studied 25, 26.
Yeah, all right. Well, what I'll do, Jim, is I'll go back and stay chronologically. So
Yep.
after doing my TAFE and studying, get my year 10, 11 and 12, and doing my Cert 3 in community services, I started working in the sector as a youth worker. I got involved with youth work, which I absolutely love. I actually miss it. It's coming up a lot for me in my journaling at the moment around doing work with the young ones again. But so I was doing that. So I also went to university as well. So I started a university degree, which was a Bachelor of Applied Science, which is a fancy word for being a researcher, but I majored in Indigenous community health development. And the reason I wanted to go into that particular degree was I wanted to work with people in the mental health space and addiction. As from my own life experience, I was highly passionate around that. And I was so glad I'd done that study, because it was a 3-year degree as well. And like after finishing that, I was just like, it was a really big feeling of achievement for myself. Like I thought, I don't think anyone in my family has done that, you know, and as an Aboriginal man that had been to prison, had lived this life of addiction and gone to such lows, to be able to come out of that and achieve that, and that feeling of yeah, for myself, it was a really, really, so that took me 3 years. So that took me up to about 28.
Did you get the acknowledgement, or did you not need the acknowledgement? I mean, I know you won an award or you were recognized, but did you want acknowledgement from your family?
At the time, I would say no, but unconsciously I did, because I'm going to get to the point of where I started doing work on the Enneagram, which I'll share, which has been a massive tool for me understanding why I do things for approval or people pleasing. So at the time I would have said no, but unconsciously, yes. A lot of my actions over the last 10 years prior to 2 years ago were done unconsciously, and I was also running on unlimited beliefs as well, limited beliefs unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
So during that study, when I finished that, I had an education, I had the degree, I'd been working as a youth worker for a couple of years. So as soon as I'd finished my study, I was working for an organisation at the time, and the lady who was my manager at the time was an amazing woman. She said to me, "You can now be a caseworker and start taking some cases on yourself," which was really cool, because that's where I got interested in trauma. So I was training lots of people in trauma, but also absorbing as much information as I could around trauma, because I knew I'd suffered trauma myself. And that really drove me for 2 to 3 years, where I was just working with keeping Aboriginal children connected to culture, developing programs. And I think professionally, I just went to this next level of I am actually quite capable of doing this stuff. So I had more belief in myself. And that led me to 2018, that's where I started noticing my energy levels were dipping. So it would have been 28, 29, very active, part of the local football community, going to the gym, but something wasn't right. I got a big dose of tonsillitis, and I was bedridden for like 10 days. And then I got thrush on my tongue after it. Like, all this stuff started happening at once. And I was just like, what's happening with me? And I was really lucky at the time. I was working with a foster carer, and I was assessing him around stuff. And every time I'd visit him, he'd be eating the same meal. And because I was writing an assessment, I had to be very thorough. So I had to ask all these questions. And he said to me, I'm eating this because it explained, because I was eating the standard Australian diet and lots of takeaway thrown in it as well. And I was like, I'm really struggling with my energy. And he's a dear friend of mine today. And he just said to me, he eats like meat and vegetables. It makes him feel better. He has a lot more energy. So I just knocked out the sugar, and I started doing this stuff. And it was like a light bulb went off in my brain. I was just like, whoo! I felt really clear. I had all this energy. I started, as a result of that, I started managing my money better. I started meditating. It was just this one key thing that had this ripple effect. So 2018, I was on fire. I was looking good, feeling good, passionate, working in a job that I loved. And then Christmas 2018, I was watching cricket, as I do on Boxing Day. It was really, really slow. And I saw an advertisement for a job at Hope for Health. And I'd watched Hope for Health on a documentary, The Magic Pill. And when I saw them using traditional diet as a framework, I was just like, I love what they're doing. It's very similar to the way I was living at the time. So I applied for the job. I just threw in a cheeky, and my resume had cobwebs on it. I was like, do I do? And I rang up the lady, who's an awesome lady and a friend to this day, Liz. And I said, I'm just ringing up about the job. She goes, yeah, application's closed tomorrow for it. So I was torn. Do I do this and put it? I just did it. I put it in, got it in. So, I had this newfound passion. So I can put it down to what my passions are: working with young people, working with people that struggle with addiction, and then also health, because I saw the changes in my health had trickled out into the rest of my life. And I just became, I grew as a human being. And I think that's my purpose on life, is to continue to grow. So the more I grow, the more I can contribute. And that's how I got shanghaied up to Elcho Island. It happened really fast. I had a job interview on Skype. A week later, I got interviewed by the amazing steering committee women, 12 Yolngu women, on a Skype video. And at the end of the meeting, they said, we want him. And it was really bizarre, because I don't have any formal qualifications in nutrition or dietitian. I'm not a naturopath, and that's sort of the job that they were advertising for. That was so I just sort of put my resume in on the background. I've done a bit of community development work, and I've got a passion for health myself. And that's how I fell into the role as a health coach up at Hope for Health.
That's awesome. And then that's how we came to meet.
We did.
Can you tell me a little bit about your role as a health coach for the Yolngu people, the Indigenous community?
Yeah. So being the health coach mentor on Elcho Island, I applied, like I said, in December. I was up there by the end of January. So it was an adventure. I didn't know what I was in for. I just packed up all my belongings. It was good. I was reading the book about being a minimalist at the time. So I just got rid of everything. I moved up there for 100 kilos of earthly possessions, not knowing what to expect. And wow, what a place. Like, my heart is so with them people in that island. At the time, they were running a retreat in April. So I got there in January, February. So I had 6 weeks to prepare 30 Yolngu people for a health retreat in Darwin. And that involves supporting them to the local clinic to have their health checks, giving them information about the retreat, what to expect. I had an amazing team of Yolngu health coaches, and them ladies just whizzed me around the isle. It was a really good introduction, so I got to get out in the community a lot really fast. So my role as health coach is to support people to be prepared for retreat, participate on retreat with the Yolngu. So during a retreat, lots of Yolngu, because I have that relationship, will come to me and ask questions, or if they have concerns or worries. I'm sort of that intermediate point between the Yolngu and the practitioners. My role is to support Yolngu after retreat in community, navigate barriers that people face living remotely. Yolngu people of Northeast Arnhem Land, where in the community I'm in, English is often a second or third spoken language. So really breaking down concepts that are foreign to their worldview, like a protein or a fat, but also bring it back to their traditional worldview where they were living in harmony with nature and seasonally, and there was no chronic disease in that area before colonisation. So really using modern Western medicine and principles and modalities that we know work, but really meshing them with traditional Aboriginal Yolngu culture. So I say it all the time. I say it to anyone when I'm talking to about the work I do. I get as much from them as they do me, if not more. I receive so much from being around the Yolngu people, the pace, how things are, in the West, we're so fast. Like, it's all masculine energy. The feminine energy is not valued at all. And I have actually, since being there, been able to drop into that space a lot more. And I'm blessed. So after retreats, I'll do cooking demonstrations. I'll be creative with exercise and movement, try and find what works. And it's always changing. It's always addressing the need. I love the role I was in as health coach because I could meet the need, but then also have the time to step back and look at things big picture and look at what working. And I was really lucky with that organisation. Karma and Tim Trudgeon, who co-founded it, had lived in the community for a long time. Their father had lived in the community, so they had relationships that I was able to piggyback off and just be accepted. And I think that's my biggest skill is relationship, and being able to be honest and respectful and have integrity and just bring me to it. And that's what my experience has been since working there. And I went to the second retreat, is where I met you, and this is where things really got exciting for me. I did that session with you, and you're the first person that I told this story to, a bit briefer than I am today, but the one that I'm telling all the listeners. So that was the first time I'd felt not ashamed of my past, and you really encouraged me to use my pain story as a gift and to be able to express that. I remember the work you were doing. You were needling my groin, and I was begging you to stop, and you were like, "Just push through. It's going to be better." And I was just like, "Oh my God!" And it was all to do with that base chakra where I was stored around safety and security. And you pointed it out, and it's true. Like, my legs have always been underdeveloped muscular compared to the rest of my body, and I was also able to identify that sacral around that blockage of not. In reflection, I left mainstream Western society to get away from being able to express myself sexually, and like there was all this stuff was happening for me, and I was working and doing work I loved, but there was still these blockages in me. I was closed off to people. I'd had the opportunity of my life to be loved by women, and I haven't been able to receive or give that back. And it was like I was 31 or 32 at that age, and career-wise I was doing really well. I'd found work that I was passionate about, but I was still robbing myself of the full human experience because of that and blockages. So you'd done that with me at that same retreat. It's just funny, the universe works in funny ways. I met David Burke, who's the Australian expert in the Enneagram, and the way he was talking about that really just, it resonated with me. I got him by myself because he's a football fan as well, and we snuck off to the Origin to watch it down at the local Noonamar pub, and we just had this beautiful conversation. And he said to me, I live in Queensland, I run meditation retreats, and if you're ever down that way, you can always welcome to pop in and visit me. And after you doing that work with you, I just started reading more around chakras. I started learning about a recommendation from another friend with Karima. I did a session with her, and she was very helpful. I became hungry for more change. Like, I just realised that I'd only come so far, and I needed to do more work and to grow in that space around being able to love, because I would withdraw my love from people, and I wouldn't allow people to love me. So that year was good for me. I met another man as well, who's a good friend, Adam, who exposed me to other modalities, breathing, cold exposure. So that year I just got over flooded with all this other stuff that I've practiced in the last 2 years that really I enjoy doing.
Incredible. I'm wondering, because you never really shared about your past, even when you were going for jobs. So how did it feel to finally speak up about all of this? Because you somehow managed to get this job without revealing your past.
I did. And so I've gone for a couple jobs, and in Queensland it comes up, but I normally will say in the interview, after I've interviewed and I think I've interviewed well, I'll say, and here's a little disclaimer in the small section, but it's been, I actually told my managers of Hope for Health at that Together retreat the first time, so I've been working for about 7 months, and I said I want to have this conversation. Might have been after my session with you, I think it was actually, and I told them, and it was really freeing just to say that, because I trusted them in the work we're doing. And the people that I share my past with previously would have been very selective, and I would do it if I think it would serve a higher purpose. If someone's struggling with drug addiction, I immediately would come in that. But in this image of this person I was creating in the professional world, and I was wearing these different masks, and but just to be able to share who I am from my heart and be enough it was liberating. It's very liberating. And I remember doing some one-on-one session work with you, and I was talking to my little Broc. I call him Little Broc. And I remember crying and being able to ask the question to someone, why wasn't I good enough? And like, to have that come out and realise that I've always thought I'm not good enough was like so profound for me in the shift around. Since then I've started affirmations around I am good enough, I'm enough, I'm more, I'm me, I don't have to do anything to prove this and that. And then out of that, when I'm in that space, my best work comes out and flows, my creativity flows, because everything I'm doing is coming from my heart and it's not coming from fear-based. And one thing I've learned is a lot of my decisions and up in life, till I finished the emotional anatomy course, with you was driven by fear of risk, fear of not being enough, fear of judgment, fear of not speaking my truth. Like I'm always a person that will listen more than I speak. And that was fear as well, in case I said something and then someone would challenge me and then I'll be in conflict and then I wouldn't know how to put up a boundary. And all this work I've had to do, it's all emotional. It's all based on fear. And I've lent to the conclusion that fear and faith cannot exist in the same moment. So I can choose in any given moment to be in fear, or I can choose to be in faith. And today I've got practices in my life that support me to come back to that for the majority of the day. And that's and that the faith I have today is this overwhelming sense of everything's okay. I'm exactly where I need to be right now in this moment. If it's a challenge that I'm having, only growth is going to come from it. Because I look back at my life honestly and reflect, my deepest challenges have prompted the most growth out of me as a human. And when the good times are good, enjoy them as well. And these days I have a lot more of that peace and that internal peace that, you know, that I never had as a child or as an adult, as a young adult, chasing drugs and changing the way I felt and my reality through addiction.
Well, I think you should continue to speak more, because you really have a profound message for someone who has been through the childhood and the teenage years and even your early 20s, and doing what you're doing now, which is only a relatively short period. I need to ask you more questions though. I think that we should use this opportunity to educate people a little bit as well. One question is, do you touch alcohol at all?
What was the question, sorry, Jin?
Do you touch alcohol at all?
No, I don't drink.
Yep.
So I've adopted the principle of complete abstinence works for me.
Mm-hmm. And was it just someone said some words to you and it all fell into place and you're just like, I'm not going to go near this? Because an addiction is an addiction, like you want more for whatever reasons. But was it this mentor who said something to you, and yeah, did it just all fall into place and you now have the will to say no?
It's a really good question. I'm glad you brought it up, Jin, because this is just a personal belief, but I believe the human experience for everyone is traumatic. We all have a pain story, and this lifetime that we're here gives us whatever we need to overcome or grow. But in saying that, I believe addiction is so widespread, and it doesn't have to be alcohol, it doesn't have to be drugs. It could be shopping, it can be workaholism, it could be gambling, it could be food. And when we're in this state of seeking something external to manage our internal, that to me is addiction. And that's what addiction is. It's disconnection, it's separation from self. So anyone that's listening and they feel that, they're called to that, if it's seeking something outside themselves that's making them feel disconnected from self, it could be addiction. So anyone that talks to me or is with me and that knows that, to me, the foundation of everything I have in my life today, which is a life far beyond anything I could ever imagine. And that's not just that's not the external, that's the internal, that's the peace and the knowing of myself and how I show up in the world and the way I can be of service to people. All that comes from the decision I made nearly 10 years ago to stop using drugs and drinking. That it wasn't one thing. Like, I don't know, I reflect on it a lot. Like, how did I get to that point? Had I had enough? I know I'd hit a spiritual rock bottom where the things that I was using outside of myself weren't doing the trick anymore, and I was suffering. The stars lined up, and I had enough desperation and willingness to change, to stop. And I would always have periods in my life where I'd stop, but staying stopped never happened. I'd always go back to that. And it's like I've read something about it, and it talks about that neurological pathways created in my brain, where when under stress or that, I'll go back to that because it creates this sense of ease and comfort, which is what I was seeking. That pathway is always there. So I have to create these new pathways, which is meditation or whatever practice I have to develop for myself, because I need to keep this new pathway fresh and clean. That pathway's still there, but it's like a shrub that grows over it. And that path is still there, but I've got to hack with a machete, and it's still there. And if I don't keep this new pathway really smooth, that's the best way I can describe what I do today. Every day I wake up and I just say thank you to the universe for the life I have today. And I surrender to the fact that I can't do that. I've used my fair lot. I've used more than enough. I'm a greedy. There's no going back to that for me today. Today I've got, prior to that, I had nothing in my life. Today I've got too much to lose. Just touching on the people I have in my life, the ability I have to be a good brother, a good son, a good friend. I've got too much to lose. So keep it really simple and keep doing the stuff I'm doing, keep working like the ongoing things that I do that I think will help me stay on the path I'm on, actually give me joy. That's the spiritual gift there. So the things that I used to do to try and stay on this path actually bring me joy today. That's where the gold is for me.
Yes. Now, I remember when we jumped on the emotional body training, you were part of my first cohort and you were the only male in the group. I always love it when I've got a guy in the group. And I make everybody share, and they have to share. And I remember we started with you, and I'm so glad that we did, because you really set the tone of how deep do we go. And I think I'm always talking about keep your facial expressions neutral, watch your body language, but inside my jaw was dropping because I was like, oh my gosh, he's sharing all this. And I didn't know all of that. And yeah, it was incredible. And I think it was just a real smack in the face for everyone to go, holy cow. But it was, you allowed everybody in that group to listen to your stories, but try their hardest not to emotionally react and get sucked into the story, because it's just your story and all you want is help to move through it, right?
I often giggle to myself about that. I remember that you sent me first and I didn't know. I just went from the heart again, and I had experience with you from sharing my story. And after you, I had shared that with closer friends that were from a network that wouldn't know that part of me as well, and that felt comfortable. So I let it all out. And I remember that group of people that were on that course were all amazing. I was so glad that I was on that course with you. I'm an art around it, and you helped me come over it. I was like, I get stuck on this financial thing. I was like, oh, don't want to invest in this. I'm just being really savvy at the moment, and COVID-19 had hit and I wasn't working. But the way I felt with you and the session we did in Darwin, my heart knew that I had to do that course, and I just did it. And I didn't have the ways or means to do it at the time financially, but I just knew I had to do it. And that course, and I still feel like I only scratched the surface on the work I should have been doing with that too, because I went back into work at the time and I wasn't fully present with that course. But I'm so glad, even the other day, I opened up the portal again and just went through the value sheet, and I did that. And it's like that in itself, like learning what my values are, my 7-year image, the way to get to there, having a mentor willing to value that mentorship and trade financial, like all that stuff I wouldn't have done without doing that course. And I was looking at I saw the one you've got coming up, and I think it's 6 weeks. And I was like, man, I'm so grateful I was on that first one, because that was your guinea pig. And it was amazing to see the transformations of everyone on that course, that end photo and people sharing at the level of depth that they shared. It was just such an amazing, amazing course.
Yes. Just to clarify, so the practitioner training is still going on, and I've decided to launch a 6-week one to open up just to the general public so that they can receive this information, but on a different level. It's not for them to do it on people, but to do it on themselves.
Oh,
now,
good.
just to go over, the struggle with like making that investment. When I love this work because when people do this work, it's not just about healing trauma or expressing their emotions. It is so much bigger than that. It's about connecting with who you truly are and then expressing who you truly are and really being able to stand in your own power. That always sounds really airy-fairy to people. But can you talk about some of the changes that did happen for you as you started to do this deeper work and be supported by a group? On a financial level, if you can share that one, you don't have to share how much, but just some things that finally fell into place and some big life changes that you made, big decisions that you made.
Yeah, so during the course of doing that course with that group and yourself, I ended up back on Elcho Island, back into the health coaching, really supporting people understand COVID-19. Work was really busy. I was still doing the course. And then I started feeling like I know my gifts and my strengths. I could be helping people in another space. Like I just had that shift come upon me, like with, I know being able to be like a conscious man and be able to support men through this sort of work was calling upon me as well, because emotions and processing emotions again gets role modeled incorrectly in this. Like there's no initiation into manhood, and I know like that's something that's on my heart as well. So an opportunity arose where I could go and live with my a friend, one of my good friends that I met on the island, a local, and he's doing fishing industry, and he asked me to support him in that business, on the more like the support the business, and he needs manpower and that. And in my mind, I was just like, yep, this really fits, because I can step into this work, then have space to ponder and possibly create this new calling that's been upon me, through the work that I did with you, using that with the other skills I've developed over my lifetime. So being able to do what's right for me for once and really step into that and not worry about feeling disloyal to an organisation or to a workplace. Like that was a fear I had a lot of the time. So doing the emotional release work got me in touch, particularly the values around, is this in alignment with values? And so that happened. I made the decision, and I stepped out of that work as a health coach into supporting my friend with his fishing industry. And just even that was interesting, because 6 months down the track, it's so weird to say, so I'm literally making money doing what I love or doing my free time, which is fishing, yet it doesn't feel right. I still feel like there's more I can be giving. I'm like, who am I? Like, where can I? You could literally say, I have a dream job. In my spare time, I'd go fishing. I'm making money to do that. So, but yet I'm feeling a calling to something else. So I know that there's more to, like, it's been a really interesting period of time the last 6 months, and a lot's been happening for me. And amongst all that, I had opportunity, not an opportunity, what would the word be? It's hard to describe this. I've got to be careful.
I just want to go back to the job thing, is because you handed in your resignation, and I'm sorry, Hope for Health, because I know you've lost a really amazing asset, but we're all on our journey. But I was like, oh my gosh, you've handed in your resignation. Hooray. But oh my gosh, what are you going to do? And I think you said to me, I think I'm just going to go dive for crayfish and sell them at the market.
Yep.
And then just have that space and that time to work out what it is you really want to do. And that has come up a couple of times where you really want to serve men and help them, be a real man, which I'm going to ask you about that in a minute.
Yeah.
So going back, the other thing that happened, which I think you were just about to touch on, so there was some administrative work that had been sitting with some people for a period of time.
Yep. So I'd had an application in with the courts and around some abuse that I'd suffered, and it had been going on for a while. And then yeah, that got finalised. And as a result of that, I was suddenly in a position where financially I could think, what can I do with my life if it wasn't dependent on paying off a mortgage, paying off the bills, the 9 to 5 grind, this and that. So that was amazing in itself, that opened up. And I've been sitting with that in that space now for a couple months where I'm just, it's been such a blessing to be able to think, what do I want to do that I'm passionate about, and create and carve that out. So, and that wouldn't, and when I shared that with the group and yourself, you said it really well. You said, when you do this work, you become ready to receive, and things change. And it's like, it's not airy fairy. It's actually a universal truth that when you do this shifting on us on an energetic level, because it is, our emotions are energy, emotion. I clear myself and I open myself up to receive, and it's like, yeah, it is really good.
I wonder if we should go into maybe just or as much as you want to share, is a bit about the Aboriginal community. And I guess for you, being Aboriginal yourself, now, are you 100% Aboriginal?
No, so that's a misconception that people can have as well, that comes from early days.
Good.
So I'll
Educate
clarify
me.
that. So people can, if someone says, are you 100% Aboriginal or half caste or 10% in that, it can actually be offensive to an Aboriginal person.
Good to know.
Aboriginality is such a, due to historical government policies such as the Stolen Generation, White Australia policy, all these acts that have been in time have, so an Aboriginal person today mightn't be what you would typically think an Aboriginal person would look like, the stereotypical dark skin, whatever. So myself, I'm fair skin. My mother's fair skin, and my father's Aboriginal. That's where my Aboriginality comes from. So if I describe myself, I'm just an Aboriginal man. I was unfortunate in regards to the way my childhood was. I got removed from my family a lot. So my connection back to Aboriginality has been a journey in itself as well. So when I was mentioned that I was 11, and I came back and made connection with my family, I was also with my father's side of the family, but they were in their own subculture group of how to put it too, it's a good, because Aboriginal people in Australia are overrepresented in all the wrong places: prisons, health outcomes, education. So as a group of people, which is 2% of the population of Australia, 30% of children in foster care in Queensland are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So we're this overrepresentation. So I identified and connected with the group that were involved with the crime, doing that. So that was like me having that connection. So so my Aboriginal comes from my father. I remember my nana when I was young. She's an amazing woman. She had 11 children. Yeah, so all boys except one girl. Yeah, and I've got lots of cousins, and I connect with my place of being, of that connection of when I meet another Aboriginal person, I can, where are you from? Say in the West, most people say when they first meet, what are you doing? What do you do for work? And people attach identity to what we do. But as an Aboriginal person, really that place of where I come from. And yeah.
So what does it mean to be an Aboriginal man?
I think being an Aboriginal man for me, I can only speak from my own experience, is there becomes a sense of obligation and responsibility. I think there's lots of work for us to do as a people, to overcome them areas that we're overrepresented in: prisons, child protection, health. Like in Australia, and when I'm talking about Aboriginal as well, I'm from Queensland, southwest Queensland. That's my area, Punthamarra Mithaka, and but I'm working in Northeast Arnhem Land, which is another complete different area in itself. So Australian Aboriginal nations all had their own individual customs and practices and cultural beliefs and song lines. So when we say Aboriginal people, it can be quite a broad term. So in where I live, I'm so blessed that that fills my cup too. In Northeast Arnhem Land, they still speak traditional language. They're still very, very connected to their cultural practices in ceremonies through funerals, initiation processes, their hunting. They've still got their land. They can still tell their stories. Where I'm from in Queensland, my ancestors were all gathered up and moved to missions, and they lost that connection. They were punished for speaking language. They were punished for practicing cultural customs and that. So any cultural knowledge that I'm privileged enough to be taught from my elders or even younger people that can teach, I learn from kids up there. So it's a true privilege to me, because anything of that cultural knowledge that I can learn and preserve and possibly pass on to my grandchildren will be an absolute blessing.
Because you talked about Yolngu people, can you just describe that a little bit more for us?
Yep. So the Yolngu people are the Aboriginal people of Northeast Arnhem Land, or Arnhem Land. Yolngu is the Aboriginal word that Yolngu used to call people. So a Yolngu person, they refer to himself as Yolngu. So that's the community that I live in Elcho Island. And Elcho Island's a very remote. It's the most remote Aboriginal community in Australia. It takes about 700 kilometres from Darwin. So I know in the 40s, the missionaries went there first. And I actually recommend, I wouldn't do it any justice, but if any of the listeners were interested in learning more, the book written by Richard Trudgeon, Why Warriors Lay Down and Die, would be an amazing read starting point. And it just tells a story around why the Yolngu people at the moment are passing away in their 50s and 60s. And that's perfect. That's accepted as normal, when we know that when we're born into this world, we should be living a lot longer, healthier lives than that.
It is an amazing book. I tried to speed read through it a couple of weeks before going to the retreat, just so I could have some understanding, because I am completely ignorant and I know that I still have so much to learn, and there is a really high mortality rate amongst the Aboriginal community. And yeah, I guess, can you talk a little bit more about that, or even the ceremony aspect? You shared that with us during the training, because I'm always talking about releasing. And are you able to share at all about the ceremonies that they go through, or just their actions when someone passes away? Because it happens on a very regular basis on the island.
Yeah, that's a good question, Jin. That's like what earlier in the interview I mentioned how I've learned as much as I give up there. When I've had a good friend of mine, she was sharing with me, so when a Yolngu person passes away, the funeral can go for anywhere up to 10 days or more. And it's a very, very different to what we experience in the West. And there's singing, dancing, mourning, grieving, all different processes and phases of the ceremony. But I can only share from what my friend shared with me. And she said to me, when I dance, I feel the sadness leave my body. And I was just like, that was so profound to me, because in my own experience of releasing emotions, movement is massive. I've never looked at a dance the same, and everyone knows their role, their responsibility, and it's just this whole, and it gave me a chance to look in at what it would be like for a Yolngu person that's forced to live within the dominant culture, which is the Western way, how they have to learn the economy. Like, a perfect example that I use is, if me or you chose not to learn about the Yolngu worldview, our life goes along just the same. If a Yolngu person refuses to learn about the Western English view, there's lots of problems in that person's life, because their whole system is overlaid upon their traditional ways of being. And yeah, I've learned a lot. Like when someone passes away, they're very, very expressive. They'll often throw themselves on the ground, scratch their hair, throw their bodies, and it's this release. It's this release that happens, and it's cathartic. You can sense it. You can't not be emotional yourself, and it's like the way that they grieve, and that we have a lot to learn from that. Well, I know myself, I do, because I try not to judge at whatever stage I'm in when I am processing grief, but I just feel like screaming, grabbing a pillow and screaming into a pillow, driving a car and screaming, punching a punching bag, all these things that when I was little, if I thought I'd do that, I'll get into trouble, or things like that. And it's very widely accepted.
Yeah. What do you think the big issue is? This is probably a massive question and needs a whole podcast on itself, but what do you think the big issue is of the Western view of the Indigenous community? Because I think there's a lot of judgment.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Jin. There is a lot of judgment. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of education that could occur. I think I'll share a personal story that might give an example of it that sums it up for me. So I've got a Yolngu friend, a woman, and she's an amazing medicine woman. She knows bush medicine. She's an incredible hunter. She works at the clinic as a supporting Yolngu women that are pregnant. She gives so much. Like, I often wonder in my own mind, like, if a person in our society did as much as she did, financially they would be millionaires. But you know what I mean? That's how rich she is, and she gives all this stuff. And then she was in Darwin one day, and she rang me up on the phone, and she was talking to me in Darwin, and she was walking along trying to get $2 off somebody so she could catch a bus. And I could hear her on the phone becoming more flustered and frustrated because she's in this world that's so far removed from her world. And I could hear the people say, go away, no, like this. So they've got this perception, this lens. It's an Aboriginal woman coming up to me asking me for $2 with no understanding or insight into what the actual situation is for her. And my heart just broke. Like, it was just like I could see how this was playing out and how people can get misconceptions or cast judgment on without knowing the truth. And it's one thing that I can take out of my life experiences. I will never judge a book by its cover. Unconsciously, a judgment might arise, but I can rise above that and just say, I don't know what this person's going through. Like, a perfect example is if someone cuts me off in traffic. The ego or the initial reaction will be to honk the horn or flip on the bird. But I just pause and I say, that person could be rushing to the hospital that just got a phone call from their mum. And it just sits, it's not for them, it's for me. And that's like, I think people need to ask questions, spend time with, like, I know January in Australia, they have this debate around changing the date, and it's Australia Day, and it comes up every year, it comes up. And I actually feel I get a sickness in my tummy around seeing some of the comments or people's opinions and this and that. And it comes from a place that's, I try to use any opportunity I can to educate and share information.
Yeah. That is another time when I see that people have made that shift, is that they just go, okay, they see and they understand these people who are perhaps being quite ignorant and see it as an opportunity to educate from the heart rather than out of anger.
And you would know from your experience on the Together retreat how you felt leaving after spending 2 weeks with the Yolngu people and the place that they come from. Like, it's absolutely amazing. They're the salt of the earth people.
They definitely are. It was an experience unlike any other, and I don't know if I'll ever have another one like that. And I do wonder how many people maybe saw that opportunity but were too nervous to say yes because of their lack of understanding. So it was an incredible opportunity that I got asked, because I was good friends with Helen. I'm so grateful for that, Helen. And oh gosh, yeah, I can't even begin to put it into words. And I think a lot of what we go through life is experiential. You can talk about it, you can inspire people, but really you just have to experience it to truly understand the power of it. And I know that quite a few of the practitioners that came along, because there were outings into town and to the shops with the Yolngu people, is that they witnessed that. And we had spent 2 weeks with them, and it definitely took time to not break down the barriers, but I guess get comfortable with the different communication styles. And that's where I think trying to understand other cultures is really important, so that you don't get offended or think that they're being rude because they're not looking at you in the eyes. It's just actually their way of communicating. And if we go into their space, their land, to actually respect that. But yeah, I remember a few of the practitioners coming back and going, they could just feel the judgment from the white people. And that, these Yolngu women and men were doing amazing things at this retreat. They were there to clean up their diet, to shift their weight, get off their diabetic medication, and learn to look after themselves and quit the smoking and all these kind of things. And we saw massive changes over that period of time. And they don't speak up, and they don't get angry at people for judging them. But yeah, we could, again, I wasn't out with them, but I often heard, like, gosh, you can just feel the judgment. And if only they knew what these people were actually trying to do to fix their health. They're not all alcoholics, and they're not, whatever people think.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one thing I really loved about the Together retreats and the coming of two worlds together in a space where you have the opportunity to break them barriers down, and you just see that we are all we're all people, and we all have fears and hopes and dreams and insecurities, and it just to come together and be on that journey. That's why that place has stolen my heart, because it's they're special people, and there's a lot of issues that the community faces, not just health. There's a lot of stuff happening. So I've found that being there and learning more from their worldview makes me a better person as well.
Is there anything else that you want to share about anything?
I've had a wonderful time having a conversation with you, Jin. I think I said to you yesterday, if I was going to do a podcast with anyone, I'd want to be interviewed by you. So it's just been really such a pleasure. I've been I've really enjoyed the chat. I think that's all from me.
And we've gone for quite a while. This is probably the longest one. And you said to me, so how long is this going to be? Because if you tell me, let's just make it short, I'll be so happy. And I said, no, just speak from the heart, and let's not cut this short, because you've had such a journey, and you have an amazing story to share. And I am so happy to share it on this platform, and I hope you continue to share it as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jin. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the work you've done with me as well to help me on my journey.
Well, I'm glad that you've actually just taken it on board and you've continued with it. But before I let you go, I know you may not be 100% clear with this, but I just want you to tap into your body. What is it that you see yourself doing? Because yes, you are working in this job where you get to fish and you get paid well for it, but ultimately, what is it that you would love to be doing with your life?
I'd love to be on some land with enough accommodation to support people that want to make changes and do the work. Either I've been trying to narrow it down. It's such a good question. I've been writing a lot, but it's whatever way that I can best be of service to people and have the most impact. And I find that through experience. So people, once they've had an experience, can never go away and be the same. So if that can alter shake someone into a state of being in line with their true selves, if that either be through some sort of retreats or ongoing. I've been practicing my coaching as well with other men through, not a paid thing at the moment, but it's been really good, like just using some of the tools and techniques I've learned, and that's been going good. So yeah, it's a good question. It'll happen. It has to happen soon anyway, Jin, so I'll keep you up.
That's all right. Well, I look forward to the changes. But I guess just on that, you talked about the retreats, and we had spoken about it a little bit in the past, but you do live in this really amazing environment. And some of the things, like I see your photos, and like, are you not scared that a crocodile is going to come and eat you? But yeah, you go fishing. What else do you do? What else is like coming home to the land and living off the land mean to you? Because we have people who hunt here, but how do you get your food?
Yeah, I've really found my calling in around living semi off the grid. I essentially will only eat what I catch or kill myself, and being on the island is amazing. The landscape is stunning. There's an abundance of food and animals available. I like fishing. I like hunting. Like I learn a lot from my friend, the Yolngu Man. So he teaches me how to hunt traditionally as well. So there's I'm really lucky. I've got a spoil of food. Like I could have buffalo, pig, kangaroo, goanna, all these various meats that Aboriginal people have eaten for thousands of years and thrived. And I'll order some food from like Greenies or something in Darwin's. And I've cut it down to, I'm not spending very much. I'm very self-sustainable. Different modalities of hunting. I like bow hunting. I like hunting with rifles, hunting with a spear. And it's really cool learning off the Yolngu way because they hunt seasonally. So just before I left, stingray was in season, and wow, it's just so nice just to learn and follow the seasons after I've been there for a couple of years. And yeah, I love it. If anyone's interested, just follow me on Instagram. I'll put a lot of more photos up on there. So
Yeah, for sure. So how can people find you?
so on Instagram I have, I've got to remember, at Keto Original 87, KETO RIGINAL 87.
Nice. And just in case that name changes, it's Broc Martin, but you can always let me know if it changes and I'll update the podcast notes. Can people email you if they're interested to get in touch about your story or anything?
Yeah, open to email. Put it in the podcast note as well, Jin, but it's Broc Martin 87 at gmail.com.
Nice one. Thank you so much for sharing. I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm just so happy to hear where you're at right now.
Yeah, thanks heaps, Jin. It's been a pleasure.